as you're going through the research and doing the due diligence, finding the right people in South Africa, are you finding that other brands are there as well? And did some of them surprise you, right? Because a lot of times when we think wine, we think French,
Hmm.
or we think, like you said, Napa Valley. We
Right.
never think South Africa. Were there brands there already that have been taking advantage of this?
That's a great question. What I'll tell you is the first thing I noticed on that very first trip was how much the big brands that we know here in America are tapped into South Africa. So big brands are doing tons of advertising, tons of activations. They're locked in. They see the opportunity in South Africa, right? Even when we did the activation with Douce for Global Citizen, like I remember coming back and saying, we got to lock in South Africa because I could see what all these brands were doing. I would say from a wine perspective, if you know wine, there are going to be some wines that are familiar to you, but only if you know wine, right? And so that's where, for me, I Best Wines becomes like the icon. Like I want this brand to be the icon of South African wines here in the United States because I don't think there is one. And it's not to say they're not offered. There's some great wines being sold here, but none of them have reached iconic status. I don't think any wine brand, to be honest with you, has really taken the position of being an icon. There's a lot of great wines, but when you think about spirits, you can think of the icons, right? There are some brands, especially in culture, that are iconic. And in my mind, I Best Wines is going to be the iconic brand for culture in the wine space.
So, okay, so you established South Africa as the way to go. From the business side, like what's needed to actually get this off the ground? Like you have to talk to the manufacturers and get a distribution deal to bottle it up, like give them a percentage of that. Like how does the inner workings of that business actually work?
Yeah, so the inner workings, I mean, listen, the 20 plus years that I spent in the game, it was like it was the manual for me to do this. And I wouldn't have been able to do this the way that I've done it if it wasn't for the 20 years of foundation that I had in this business. And so the first thing was like, first of all, building a model that was going to make us money because wine is not an easy thing to make money off of. The margins oftentimes aren't as impressive as most people I think would think they would be. So for me, the first brief to like my finance girl was like, I want the wine to be like spirits. In the spirits world, 35-40% margins are typical. In the wine world is 20 to 25. I was like, I wanted the margins to be at 40%. Like this is like a spirits brand because I knew the inner workings of
Hmm.
that piece of the business.
So wine and spirits are two different things.
Wine and spirits are two
Spirits
different
is
things.
alcohol,
Yeah, spirits are, your cognacs, your
tequilas,
tequilas,
Vodka.
your vodkas,
and
and
then
wine is wine,
and champagne is champagne.
and champagne is champagne. Yeah. And in South Africa, they make champagne, but because it's not made in champagne, it's called MCC.
Mm.
Because, there's all these laws and these rules, but South Africa has incredible sparkling wine.
You said the average margins is 20% for wines, right?
Yeah, 20, 25%.
And you said you wanted
Yeah.
40%.
Yeah.
So, okay, how did you envision getting 40% when the average is 20%?
Well, I think one of the things that I understood was in South Africa, you can get really good quality wine, and the cost of doing business is much lower than the cost of doing business other places. So the quality of my wine, for instance, if I was producing this in a Napa or even a France, in some instances would be double, triple. And so understanding that, and again, building these relationships in South Africa so we weren't going out there, blind. Um, that was the first thing, was to understand, like, I don't want to cut corners on quality, but I know based on just purely relationships, we can get the wine that we want to then help us get to the margins that we want to be at.
So the order in the spirits and, I guess, wine industry: supplier, distributor,
Yeah.
customer,
It's a 3-tier system in the US.
right?
Yep.
So is it similar in South Africa, and how are you navigating through that there, right? Are you finding you're the supplier,
I'm the supplier.
right? So you're finding the distribution system.
Yeah.
What is that system like there as opposed to here, right? What are some of the differences
Right.
that you experience?
Yeah, so I'm the supplier. I have a partnership with a winery, one of the premier wineries in Stellenbosch. That was probably the longest part of the process, was identifying who was going to be the right partner, because there's a lot of basic things like integrity is super important to me. Like, I don't care if you make great wine, like, how do you treat your people? What the winery environment is like. And then it was super important for me to connect with a winemaker who understood my vision, that was going to like follow my brief in terms of like what I wanted to do from a blending perspective.
Mhm.
And so we were able to do that. And then I would say secondarily, it was just thinking about everything from like the packaging, the design, like all of that, and making sure that it made sense, business sense, right? So everything is done in South Africa. Nothing is done here.
Mm.
The only thing that's here is the owners, me, my team, who are equity owners. But everything else, everything that you see on this pack is done in South Africa.
So how is the exporting process work as
Yeah.
far as I'm assuming you're shipping bulk product? Like, is that done at one time, or you do like, every month you get orders, shipments that come in?
So it's a very intricate process, which is why I mentioned earlier I wouldn't have been able to do this. The chops that I have from 20 years in the business have positioned me to get through what this process requires. So it's first, identifying what you want to produce, blending it, going through the bottling process, the packaging process, and then, you know, getting it on an actual container, on a cargo ship. Cargo ship goes from continent to continent, getting it through customs, and then working with a distribution network to get it out. In my case, I've done this 100% myself. Like, I own this brand 100% myself. So I did every part of that process. And I have 5 incredible women that have been working with me, women that I've met just at different points in my career, who trusted me, understood the vision. And what I said to them was like, these are all the roles that we're going to need to make this happen. And I'm going to give all of you equity. And so everybody had their piece of the puzzle when we made it happen. Again, it's not easy to do. It requires a lot of know-how. It requires patience. You can't rush this process, because ultimately, beautiful pack, but when you open it, if the wine isn't good, it doesn't mean anything.
So before there were equity partners, it was just you.
Just me.
And this is, I don't know if I don't want anybody to get this misconstrued. This is not an easy thing to do, number one, but it's cash intensive as well. So how did you get funding? Was it self-funded? What was that process like?
Yeah, 100% self-funded. So all my capital went into this. I made good decisions in my life: real estate, art investing, saving, just understanding, that cash is so important. And I knew that there was going to come a time that like all those decisions would come into play, and this is the result of that, right? So yeah, it's just me in terms of investing my own capital, and then the women on the team have invested their time, and that's equally as valuable, right? Because without a team and without people to build it with, I mean, their time is as valuable as my capital, because they have been the ones that have been helping me move the pieces, which is why making sure that they all got equity in the business was so important to me. um, a month before I launched, 5 friends, who are all women, came to me and said, listen, we see what you're building. We already know you know what you're doing. This is going to be amazing. Like, we want to invest in this. So 5 Black women came together and invested in the business. But before then, it was just me.
So you have a winery that you get your wine from, right?
Yes.
I'm assuming you're not the only person that gets wine from that winery.
No, yeah, so they do tons of white labeling projects. This is a proprietary to iBest Wines. These blends I actually blended with the winemaker. I've shared a lot of that across my social channels, because I wanted people to see what it took for me to build this.
Mm.
But the winery is, best in class, award winning, and they do tons of business around the world. And they were so excited about this.